internet. I've seen tons of interviews, tons of hit pieces, tons of parodies and memes. And I used to watch Howard Stern, so I would hear your alter ego on Howard Stern all the time. But I didn't get anything about you as a human, as an individual growing up. I know your parents, your father was a dentist, your mother was a homemaker, but nothing of your childhood. How many siblings did you have? Where were you brought up? How long has your family been in America for? What generation American are you? Back to basics, and then we're going to get to the meaty stuff.
Well, sure. I mean, I grew up in a suburb of Dallas until I was a sophomore in high school. Then we moved here, went to Anderson High School. And my family, both sides go back to the Mayflower. And after that, the founding of Texas, and a lot of other stuff. So you could say, I guess, as colonizers, I'm part of the first colonizing groups to North America from England and Scotland and Ireland. And I'm just a pro-Americana guy that loves everybody. And I saw an anti-American globalist movement taking place when I was in high school. So I decided to try to get on air, got on Access TV in 1995, got on local radio by 1996, and got syndicated by 1998. And so I was already gotten pretty big and pretty syndicated by the time I was 30-something years old. And then I challenged 9/11, the fact there was a lot of evidence of prior knowledge and then lies about WMDs. And then I, of course, then just expanded out from there. And so that's basically where I come from and what I stand for. And I've never been trained by the CFR or trained by ABC News or NBC News. I don't have a college degree. I just am a commentator that gives my opinion and my analysis of things that has guests on air. And I don't pre-screen my guests. I don't, sit there and talk to them for 2 days before they come on, like CNN or Fox News would do with a lot of their guests. We just have people on. They give their opinion on things and just, I really believe in free speech.
And I think, my sense is that for a lot of people that have a willingness to challenge the institutional narrative, a willingness to see the world through a different prism than the one the institutional press or the official textbooks want to have, is that they have a unique family history. And like in your case, like your ancestry goes back, actually we share some ancestors, goes back to Norman, England, if you go back to one side of the line. But you go into Western Pennsylvania, then to Tennessee, places like the hill country of Northern Mississippi, then to East Texas. And this is an old populist line of thought of people that goes back literally centuries that you sort of grew up amongst. But the other thing you've talked about is that one of the big influences, I think, for people that are learn to challenge and question the institutional narrative rather than just bow to it and repeat it, as our docile institutional press does, is the stories that you hear growing up as a kid, the stories you hear from family members, the stories can you talk about how some of that influenced your understanding of the world and your willingness not to accept the institutional narrative?
Well, sure. My mom's brother, who died like 6 years ago of pneumonia, he's a great guy. He had been a big helicopter ace in Vietnam and been in secret operations. And then he got recruited into Iran-Contra. And then he got out of it. And I remember growing up, he'd come to visit and he would just say, everything's fake. It's all a lie. The government's doing horrible, evil things. It's not our government. It's a breakaway group. And my dad had been involved in kind of some of the scientific establishment stuff. And he basically had the same view. Like you said, kind of that thing that goes back to Magna Carta, where we get common law, where we get basically 1776 from, is an extension of 1215 and Runnymede, and the Scots and the Irish and the Brits all fighting with each other, the Norman invasion before that, and until those fights of basic freedoms that were first demanded by the lords, and then by the local commoners, and then by the average people, and then by women, and then by non-whites. And so it's not like America was founded trying to be mean and not extend those rights. There was debate about that during the Declaration of Independence, during the Constitution, and it should have been settled in. It wasn't, but it was definitely a sin. But it is the West, and it is those ideas that basically worldwide created the original ideas of true every person is created equal and endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. And so absolutely, I grew up around a bunch of people that had been in the government and been in the army and been in the military and been inside all these things. And so I grew up, hearing all this stuff and learning all these things and just thinking everybody knew this stuff. And so I guess I did kind of grow up in that soup where they weren't telling me, go out and do this. I was growing up around this and seeing this. And so I guess I was primed and ready right out of high school to start doing that.
And that's the second thing you mentioned, because one aspect of of your life history that's completely not talked about very much is you're an exceptionally well-read individual, and you started out reading from a very young age. And some of the books that you've referenced are fascinating books that I recommend to people. Can you talk about, one, why were you interested and curious about books at a young age, and to know the kind of things you could just talk about right there?
Well, I mean, reading condensed history, and obviously it's not all 100% true because history is a mix of different perspectives and ideas. But reading really, thick historical books where every page is a battle, every page is a piece of legislation. I mean, I read all the classics like Rise and Fall of the Third Reich that won a Pulitzer Prize. Then I read like Order of the Death Said, just a 700 book page, a book just about the SS. And I read about World War I, and I read about the Napoleonic Wars, and I got really addicted to reading that because I was good at reading by the time I was about 7. By the time I was about 8 or 9, I was reading almost at a college level. And so my parents would not buy me a bunch of stuff. They'd let me go to the library. So I go to the library once a week, and I'd get like all the Robert E. Howard Conan books that was written by a Texan. And I read those in about a month, all 7 or 8 of them. And so then I discovered at about 8 or 9, history books are actually more entertaining and there's more action in those. And so whereas other kids, when I was 9 years old, were playing Dungeons and Dragons, and I would play Dungeons and Dragons with some of the neighborhood kids too. But whereas they were doing that every day, I was, once I got home after football practice, if I wasn't, out playing baseball or whatever, I was just reading all these history books because they were way more, and I learned about the characters and how they were connected. So to me, it was like fiction. But it was reality. And so that kind of helped me get a major scaffolding or skeleton to then by the time I was out of high school and went to local college for a few years, and I was already light years ahead of what they were talking about, and was really cynical that I saw that it really wasn't education. It was more indoctrination, and it was very, very dumbed down. So I saw that very, very quickly.
Now, you had a favorite book, I think, that you fell in love with when you were in your teens about conspiracy theories, what were called conspiracy theories at the time. Do you remember the name of that book?
Sure. It was None Dare Call It Conspiracy by Gary Allen, whose son went on to found Politico. And by falling in love with it, it was a short 200-page book or so, but I'd already read most of that. I already knew a lot of it. And so it was just so quick and accurate how the super rich fund fascism and communism, how the ultra rich have gotten together and they had, Anthony Sutton documents and stuff that had just come out in the church committee hearings in the 70s, where it was all the proof. I mean, it wasn't like the opinion about this corporate world government plan, and they want this to take control of the planet and depopulate people. And so it was very intriguing because it's not like where you're reading comic books and there's Captain America and Red Skull, but it's fiction, but based on archetypes. This is like real. So I'm reading, David Rockefeller said in the New York Times that we want Mao Zedong and communism. I'm not going to believe that. I'm going to go to the library. So by the time I was about 18 or 19, I would go to the UT Law Library, and they'd give me help and help me find in the microfilm the actual New York Times article. And I'd be sitting there with the librarian going, yeah, we never read this. This is incredible. So it was something, it was about reading a history book. And then before the internet was, ubiquitous like it is now, before you could find stuff, and then going and seeing it for yourself. And so it would be a huge deal. And then as soon as I got on Access TV in 1995, and I would like hold up these New York Times articles, here's David Rockefeller calling for communism and saying Mao Zedong is good. And so I was just repeating what the establishment would call, right-wing John Birch talking points, but they weren't right-wing John Birch talking points. These were real things and real-world government being set up, and I was like in on it, and I knew about it, and I was going to have to warn people because I thought as soon as we warn people about this horrible stuff, they're going to be able to stop it. And so that's basically the genesis of what I did. But then they would say, okay, you're on local radio. We don't believe you. So I said, okay, I'll make films and show these news articles. I'll make films and interview people, and I'll make films and show people. And so that's how I was immediately successful, putting out these really, primitive films that were really almost like books on tape, books on video, where I would say, okay, here's this article, here's where they said it, and here's this clip where this guy said it. And so I found out early on a lot, it wasn't right wing or left wing, like the media always says, like asking questions about government, is cryptically racist or some secret group. It was liberals, it was conservatives, it was black people, old people, white people. And I immediately got underground popular with all these rappers, and leftist groups were like probably more prominent conspiracy theory than anybody because of JFK. And I was suddenly going to New York and going to San Francisco and, meeting with people that had huge archives of just everything. And it was wild. It was like finding out about a whole alternate universe, like the left would say, but it was an alternate universe that was just old news and old clippings and what was being debated 20, 30, 40 years before, which now you turn on the news, you never even hear about. So it wasn't even so much that we knew that this old news was gospel. It was the excitement of kind of re-engineering or reverse engineering history and discovering contemporary history of what had just happened in the near past.
What's interesting is you and Ralph Nader share a certain thing in common, which was Ralph used to tell me you don't have to worry about the world as long as a kid can get access to a library. Because if you get access to a library, you can find out information, find out what's relevant. And that's why you've been one of the top people warning about the cultural indoctrination and infiltration of public libraries against it that try to change our kids' perspectives and not make it an independent repository of just of information rather than indoctrination as some people would like to make it.
And by the way, I was blessed to get to meet Ralph Nader about like 1997. Like I said, I was giving speeches in Dallas and in New York, and twice I was places where he was speaking, and he was so nice. And I went to dinner with him and his sons when I was like 23 years old, and they were really cool people. I guess I think like Lebanese Americans, and so yeah, I got to meet all these amazing people who I would see as a real liberal, Ralph Nader, but very respectable, good guy. Then I got to meet like General Benton K. Parton, former head of Air Force weapons development that led the anti-communist crusade. And then I got to meet like Ted Gunderson, the former top FBI agent that exposed all the child kidnapping rings. Because I mean, there was not a lot of people doing this at that point. And so you immediately were like, oh, here, come on the curtain. You know about this? And it was pretty exciting.
Well, this is the amazing thing. And we're going to get it into some of your discourse, because for anybody who knows you, whether they love you or hate you, you are extremely knowledgeable in historical facts. I mean, when you're keeping up and maybe even taking over with Joe Rogan, you know the facts.